Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest Global Studio event. We've been really looking forward to this because the idea of doing a charrette together I find really exciting. And I'm Kristen Kornienko. I'm a faculty member at Athabasca University in the RAIC Center for Architecture, and I'm also the coordinator of the Global Studio project. And I'd like to just take a moment to acknowledge that I live and work on the lands stolen from the Secwepemc Nation and here in the interior of British Columbia. And I'd just like to acknowledge the, as a way of witness and healing, the graves that have been found on the Kamloops Reservation Indian School in Kamloops, which is just an hour from me here, those at the St. Eugene's Mission Lower Kootenai School in the Lower Kootenai Band, those found at the Mariavale Indian Reservation School in the Cowessess First Nation in Saskatchewan. So yes, and then I'd like to just go ahead and pass it over to Adria, who will introduce you to Supernatural, which is a student-run group from Dalhousie University, and she will be leading us in our charrette today. So over to you, Adria.
Thanks. I'm also joined by two Supernatural colleagues, Larissa Kroll and Jen Frail. We can, all three of us will introduce yourselves, but yeah, my name is Adrian Maynard. I'm a Master of Architecture student at Dalhousie University in Halifax, located on the unceded ancestral land of the Mi'kmaq people. I'm calling in today from Vancouver, though, other side of the country, because I'm currently on work term. And I'm the program director, kind of officially and unofficially for Supernatural. And I'll pass it off to Larissa and Jen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Larissa. My introduction is very similar to Adria's. I'm also an emergent student from Dalhousie University. And I'm also coming to you from Vancouver currently, and I'm very excited to be chatting with you all today.
Hi, everyone, and my name is Jen, and I'm speaking to you from Kivoktuk in Mi'kma'ki, otherwise known as Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm also an MArch student in the same class as Adrian and Larissa, and I'm here today helping out in place of Laura Nolte, who I just want to credit with a lot of the organization that went into this event here today. So I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my, thanks Jen and Larissa, I'll just share my screen and give like a brief introduction to Supernatural. And since the charrette that we're going to do today is based on our manifesto, I'll give a quick run through of that and then do some, like kind of introduce some guiding questions in the loose schedule for today. I do want to note though, this is our first event in over a year. And I'm a little rusty at best. So today is not about being like the most knowledgeable person in the room or being super polished. This is just getting us all together, having conversations. I know people involved in the Global Studio project and people even outside of it all have amazing work going on. And we thought that this would be a great opportunity to get all these curious minds together and just to do some imagining and collaging about what kind of future we see that includes regeneration and the topics that Global Studio is focusing on. So yeah, please ask questions, be curious. This is we're all here to have some fun and have some good conversation. So sure, stop. So Supernatural, sorry, is in summary, we're a student group that was started in fall 2019. We've been kind of on and off over the pandemic, but really excited to be back. We're now a nonprofit organization made up of predominantly students, but we're really starting to engage with people at Athabasca and other practitioners to create a network of people across the country and even across the world that want to challenge architectural convention and really challenge this idea of, or bring forth this idea of regeneration in our practice and in our education, and really wanting to move beyond this idea of damage limitation or sustainability towards, you know, a more reciprocal regenerative future, which involves questioning a lot of the ways that we have done things in the past. So right now our mission is really to promote architectural education and practices to really explore and positively contribute to social and ecological systems at different scales, and also interrogate how environmental degradation and climate change contribute and exacerbates you know, ongoing systems of oppression. So this is, you know, an example. The Charrette we're going to do today is an example of some of the programming that we do, cross-disciplinary programming that we do. So I'm just going to go through the manifesto quickly, just to kind of introduce it to you all, because it'll be the basis for our Charrette today. So point one is really, and at kind of the basis of all of this, which is the willingness to take a risk and move beyond what we've been taught as best practice, to call upon institutions of architecture to honor the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in curricular programming and practice, which is especially applicable, I mean, always applicable, but especially applicable over the last few weeks in light of a lot of the news that's been coming out, which is, I mean, news to some, but not actually news. It's been known about for a long time, and it's time that a lot of our, you know, our practice and our institutions start acknowledging and repairing this damage that architecture and design is complicit in a lot of ways. Number three is to advocate for architecture and design communities to urgently shift beyond damage limitation or sustainability towards a more regenerative perspective, to broaden the horizon of design possibilities through an understanding of materiality, building details, and systems boundaries, to develop a precision of language, an accuracy of terminology in an attempt to counter greenwashing and communicate transparently with clients, governments, and communities, to look to the past for ways structures were built and materials were used, to generate informed, or to stay informed of the research and data that has already been generated and continue to build upon this body of knowledge and these relationships, to have a strong comprehension of ecosystems and how they function and what they need to thrive, and how architects can integrate designs into these systems, to understand adaptive reuse, working with materials already harvested as the most carbon conscious option, to bring innovation to natural materials by using low-tech and high-tech approaches, to cultivate an interdisciplinary approach to design problems and strengthen communication and collaborations that flow beyond architecture through science, arts, and engineering and beyond. And finally, to understand that our physiology and psychology mimics our environment, and that the built environment that we live in has an impact on the structure of our brains and bodies, and the structure of the brains and bodies of the creatures and lives around us. So for today's charrette, we'll just do like a quick introduction, which we just did. And the charrette should take about 60 minutes. We'll break into breakout rooms, which should be, there'll be 3 of us. There'll be 2 breakout rooms, and then we'll have a third one just in the main room for anybody who's wanting to just listen in and pop in halfway through, so they don't need to get assigned. And then every group will appoint, you know, 1 or 2 speakers. So when we come back together at the end, each group can kind of talk about what they did, but that way everybody doesn't have to try and fight over each other to speak, and just kind of keep it more succinct. So we'll do collage in small groups for about 30 minutes, discuss as a group for about 20 minutes, and then we will, you'll get a little notification from Zoom that it's time to come back to the main room. So we'll reconvene as a group. The appointed speakers will summarize what everybody did and kind of what they talked about. And then, you know, as a group, and we can identify some emerging themes and overall takeaways that kind of emerged across all of the work. And then part of the reason that we wanted to do the charrette was we have 3 more events coming up over the next half a year. And we were trying to think of what topics we wanted to do, but we thought that it would be so much more fun to bring people together and actually have those the topics of those next events emerge more organically. So what comes out of today will help us inform what we're going to do over the next 6 months. And then after the kind of the main event, if anybody else wants to stick around, once our kind of creative juices are flowing, we can do some like a quick design exercise to kind of think of some ideas for the Global Studio logo, which I know is something that's been on Kristen's mind. And I think it would be, this would be a fun way to, because we already have people together, to do some ideas or think of some ideas on that. So for I'll post the link in the chat, but it should be in the email that was sent out. We'll be doing this in Miro, so we'll break out into our breakout rooms. We'll talk. We'll use Zoom to communicate, but we can see everybody's mouses and stuff in Miro, so we can all work collaboratively at the same time and see what each other are doing without having to share screens. In the Zoom call, or sorry, in the Miro board, we have an example collage at the top. These aren't necessarily supposed to be beautiful works of art. It can be, but this is more just an idea of generating discussions, and we'll basically pick a couple of points that resonate most with us out of the manifesto and try to do some collaging to kind of imagine what that could look like, describe what it feels like, and even build upon that or edit that point. We have some sample collage items along the sides, and if anybody needs them, there's some keyboard shortcuts at the bottom in case they're new to this platform. So we'll break everybody into breakout rooms now. I guess we can kind of reconvene in a few minutes, maybe like I know it's different time zone for everyone, but at 20 past the hour. So we just need a couple of minutes to break people into groups. And yeah, then we'll get started. Sound good?
Adrian, I don't seem to be able to join my room.
Oh, that's weird.
Sorry.
Let me try this again.
I'm supposed to be in room 2, correct?
Yeah, it says that the rooms are going to close in 40 seconds, which I don't know why. So let me fix this. Computers are hard.
I'm the same. Don't seem to be able to join the room either.
I actually don't think I can assign you. I don't know if you were an option to be assigned. Sorry, everybody. First time doing breakout rooms. So. That's strange. I don't know why everybody's back.
Oh,
Sorry,
There we
folks,
go.
it's my first time doing this. I must have closed it by accident. I think we're good. Okay. So I think who's in this room? I think some people are just listening in. But I think it's the three of us, so maybe too many people. 1 second, I'm still somebody.
Well, I can just resolve by just staying in the main room, if that works.
Pardon?
I can just resolve by staying in the main room.
Okay,
The fact that we can't seem to assign me.
that's okay. I was gonna keep you here. Anyway. Maybe bring Joy back or something. Still someone from another group. So we have 3 of us, 4 of us.
Hello, I think I'm too. I didn't separate it in a room.
Yeah, we're gonna do one group in the main room.
Okay.
Yes. Just because we will have some people maybe jumping in halfway through. So we just thought that we'd have some people in here when if people decide to join. So I guess it's the four of us. I think everyone else is.
I see 9 participants in here.
Yeah, I think there's a couple people just listening in.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, 1 sec, just making sure everyone's good to go. Laura, I just brought you back out here because there were 2. I was just trying to divide the number of people across the groups evenly. So I brought you back out here. I hope that's okay. Hi, Joy.
Hi, I just saw the pop-up to say come back. So
Yeah, sorry, no, I just did that because I put so many people on Larissa and Jen, and I have a smaller group, so I just wanted to make sure it was even.
no worries.
All right.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Nice.
Okay, so I guess we can, the link to the Miro board is in chat. Hopefully everyone can see it. Let me know if that message hasn't shown up for you. And we can get started.
Great. Are we group 3?
Yes.
Perfect.
Probably would have been, actually, I'll just post that in the chat. That's a really good point. I should let people know which group they're in.
I see a lot of people populating the other 2 groups on Miro, so.
Yeah, so I think we'll just take number 3.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess like the starting point here, I guess, is as a group, we can decide, you know, which 1 or 2 points intrigue you folks the most and which ones you think would be fun to explore a little bit more visually.
Mm-hmm.
So the manifesto's there if you guys want to read through it again. You can circle some numbers and we can get an idea of which ones
Oops.
you're feeling.
Well, you know, first of all, I think this is a wonderful charrette, and thank you for organizing it. I think it's fantastic to collaborate in this way. One that I particularly was drawn to was number 6, to have a strong comprehension of ecosystems and how they function, what they need to thrive, and how architects can integrate design within these systems. And this is something particularly that I've been interested in the last few years because, you know, as an architect, every time we build a building, we are interrupting, you know, the earth, the ecosystems, and to have a broader understanding of that and what our impacts are, for me is critical in order to ensure that we are working towards climate stability and working towards, you know, trying to heal the land rather than continuously damaging it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Veronica. I'm also really drawn to number 1, a willingness to take risk. and to move away from the norms of the so-called best practices. And
Yeah, I think that's a great one too, because I feel that in practice, it's sometimes very difficult to take risks because there's so many, elements that are surrounding that risk. But unless we do take risks and find ways to really integrate and collaborate with each other to reduce that risk, we'll never really make change.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's one thing that I've been learning about that point on work term is that it's not just your own willingness to take a risk, but I think trying to create environments where other people feel like they can do that with you. Because I mean, we're even at the office I'm at right now, like we're doing we had a really cool housing project on the go that was gonna be like low-income housing rental units that were gonna be like step foot 4 and like is really this really cool project, but then, and they were asking the people that we were doing this for wanting to do all these things, but then they saw that it was too expensive or that it didn't work with how they usually do things. And now they're like backing away because it freaks them out. And it's, I feel like I'm noticing that it's not necessarily lack of willingness to take a risk on the designer's point of view, but like after a while, I think you just get kind of beaten down. They're like, oh, I'm not going to try this because they're just going to say no. And it's, I'm realizing how hard it is to not only try and take risks, but get people to let you do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a real strategy actually, is how to, and something that I know I'm continually learning is how to get people on board to do things in a way that isn't sort of doesn't shut them down, and it engages them instead. And often it can be difficult to do that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So as a group, are we feeling okay about those numbers, or is there anything else that's standing out to the people?
I think 7 is also standing out to me because there is a lot of work. A lot of work that is done globally, nationally, that I hear about, even makes news and then just disappears. Like for example, all the people who are doing research and making alternative materials, like all these different types of concrete and stuff. You hear about people in Montreal, in like the States, other parts of the world, and then it just like, it's gone. And so I wonder what is stopping, like, how do you follow up with these things? And even like when our group AED was first introduced to Global Studio and that effort, realizing that we were all trying to create resources that are available to students and such, and finding out that there's a lot of different groups that are doing that. Like, how do you make one almost Google basically? Like maybe you don't need one overarching place, but how do we really catalog the progress that we're making so we can build on that rather than restart?
A really good point. And that's, I mean, this might even kind of even ties to the other points, because I think a lot of these have to do with the way our institutions are and our kind of bureaucracy and our processes are set up, right? Because then that's something we've learned a lot too through the work that we've been doing in Supernatural, where we've been wanting to like, oh yeah, let's make all these resources. And then we realize that actually most of the work that we want to do is just connecting the people who have already been doing this work to the people who want to learn it. Because, in terms of regenerative design and a lot of other stuff, we don't, it's not necessarily prioritized in school or in practice. And so you're not, I feel like by being in school or being in practice, you're like kind of naturally connected to a lot of resources, but only the ones that are prioritized by that system, right? So if we're not going to be getting connected to these people through our schools or through our everyday work, it's really hard to connect with those people who are doing that awesome work.
I just put a link in the chat. This on Dezeen last week or the week before, there's this really great new library that's been started of materials that capture CO2. And it's going to be an ongoing project so that, they just, as these materials come up, they get added into the library. And it's I think it's a really cool idea. And It's even something maybe like as part of the global studio we could think about doing is,
Yeah.
and we've talked about this of how, you know, as Joyce said, there's so much interesting stuff. And in a way, that's what frustrates me so much, is that it's not like we don't know how to do things better. We do know how to do them better. We just don't do them. And so to like have a place, that a centralized place to be able to easily find stuff.
Yeah. Well, I just brought this example collage over just to help people get started. So, I mean, I know it's always hard to start from nothing on a collage like this, but we can just start doodling and maybe start drawing some connections between what it is that we're talking about. Let's see.
I was just going to say, I think just following on Joy's comment about knowledge and building upon knowledge, that's a real big issue in industry right now, where there's a lot of innovation that is, you know, happening, but first of all, the knowledge is not being shared. And secondly, there's always a question as to, can you rely on the resources that you have available? And that kind of leads into risk as well, because if you can't rely on the resources that you're using, or if you're not sure about the resource you're using, that ultimately leads to risk in practice. And so having a source of concrete, you know, materials or, you know, knowledge and different strategies to regenerative design is really important, I think.
Sorry, Adria, which group number are we?
We're number 3.
Well, and it's interesting to think about that, Veronica, in terms of, you know, like what's been going on with the challenging of the intellectual property of the vaccines with COVID, and how, you know, how that's excluding so many people from having access to the vaccine. And you know, the idea that we need to treat climate change at that same level of crisis that we're treating COVID, really. And because you know, the issue of a lot of these production of materials and so on is limited by the fact that they are copyrighted, and you know, they're and so they, you know, it makes them very exclusionary.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think one of the biggest ways to mitigate risk and create innovation and have reliable resources is to work collaboratively. And it's something that we talk a lot about, the integrated design process, where you're working, you know, with many different specialties in their field in order to do something new. I think becomes really important. I almost want to start off with like something like a circular element, you know, to kind of start to talk about this cycle of integration that kind of happens, and what regenerative design is really about. It's about, you know, how do we fit into the cycle that we're, you know, interrupting when we design.
Actually, I want to point to number 8, to look at the past of ways structures were built and materials were used. We can see in the past they actually were using the affordable materials like wood. It was afforded around cities and people in forests, and this material in nowadays we have advanced materials, and using wood and advanced materials, I think it's a good idea to less the effect of other materials in our environment and in our climate. And I think it's a good way to use wood as an advanced material, and to use wood in our buildings, and use the past ways and structures to build our community or our homes. Or I think maybe it's a good thing to take it in our point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially like, I think it's, we have the ability to build these like incredibly complex structures using incredibly advanced engineered materials. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in this idea of like innovation and progress that we forget that, you know, like older ways of building are sometimes actually more efficient, and you don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel in order to build things well and build things within your means. Because historically, when we didn't have access to seemingly infinite materials from seemingly infinite places, you had to work within the means. So you had to build things that weren't, you know, you use what you have and it's not wasteful, and it's, you have to be able to maintain it. You have to be able to, you know, make it last. And you don't necessarily need to look exclusively to inventing entirely new things in order to do that. You can do both. It's a really good point.
I'm trying to copy an image of like sharing, I guess, which is just like basically two hands. And kind of building on something Veronica said earlier, and even what you said, Kristen, like there's an issue with sharing of knowledge, at least in our field, because architecture is proprietary. And so I think that maybe holds us back in comparison to other industries that seem to work more collaboratively. But then I wonder if there's also the question of sharing too much. And by that, I mean like in how we export certain resources, because and then I guess clarifying what may be misnomers, because it seems in some capacities that wood is like a very good alternative to certain materials, but I'm starting to wonder how much wood like even our country has to, I guess, rely on, because with all that's happening with these old growth forests that are being like completely cut down and destroyed, and a lot of exports of wood to other countries, like why is that happening, kind of? So I wonder if wood, like, I don't know, there seems to be a big issue there, because we shouldn't have to destroy ecosystems like that. And even though our country has already been going through some stuff in terms of inconsistent winters in several places in the country, and a lot of effects of climate changes and higher temperatures even before this year, though this summer is the most extreme seeming because it's so early. When you're damaging like ancient forests like that, that obviously has a ripple effect too. And is it really worth it just so whatever logging companies can be able to meet that supply? So just because something is naturally grown doesn't mean it's the best alternative if we're, yeah, it's just, I guess, multifaceted.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Joy. I think that, you know, the use of wood and the, you know, the rise of, you know, different mass timber products and stuff has to come with very, you know, well thought out policy and standards in terms of forestry and sustainable forestry management. And also, you know, control as well. Like it has to be very carefully controlled. And it also has to be sustainable in many different ways. Like for instance, you know, indigenous forestry is something really important. You know, it's a kind of traditional way of doing. And so I think that we need to be thinking of many, many different aspects when we even start to talk about implementing aspects of mass timber. And why the old growth forests are being cut down is definitely an issue, because mass timber uses trees that are 10 years or less because they use dimensional lumber to press. So I think it becomes an idea of policy and standards that have to come in with advocacy and knowledge to support the innovation, to make sure the innovation is not long-term damaging. Because one aspect that still hasn't been answered when you talk about wood construction and mass timber is what happens at the end of life. Like, we're sequestering carbon now, but when that wood is at its end of life in 100 years, when the building is being, dismantled or destroyed, where does that carbon go?
Well, and going back to the, sort of the thinking of the ecosystem and how those is, I just put that giant bug next to the forest because I live in a forest, and, I hike or mountain bike. I'm in the forest all the time. And so I see the long, the health of the forest over years. And, we had the bark beetle, and now we have a fir beetle, and nobody's even talking about it. And the trees are dying, and and they turn red. It's quite horrifying because they turn red within a matter of days. A healthy tree is suddenly bright red and it's dead. And their whole, and I've talked with people in the timber industry, and they just don't take it seriously. And it's like we don't learn even after what happened with the bark beetle. And I feel like, when are we actually going to start really thinking about how the ecosystems are working and being impacted, and and really begin to be quite honestly be real about it,
I can't agree more. Oh my goodness. I have so much to say on this topic too. I live in the forest as well, and I share a 200-meter boundary with a 97-acre plot that was just wiped out in March. And when I spoke with, I basically joined an activist group about this, and formed a nonprofit ourselves. And we're trying to battle back, because the concept of, well, we need wood to build homes, and we're doing this sustainably. Look at, we've left a few trees here. I've seen the impact on the animal life around the area. Living on an acreage, and like you do, Kristen, you live in a forest and you feel the ecosystem around you. It's amazing how much that changed when I moved out of the city and into an acreage. Something that is really standing out to me is the number 9, the concept of adaptive reuse. And as soon as I started flipping my lens to how much waste there is in the world, the adage, haste makes waste, stands out to me. Because the way that I've seen construction industry, my husband's a construction manager, and I worked in an industrial application for a number of years before coming back to school. I found that really you cut a little bit out of a plywood piece and it's garbage, because it's no longer a fresh sheet that goes back on a truck. And it's easier for people to throw away things than it is to build with them. So I've made it my mission to build almost only with reclaimed material. What I found is really interesting. It flips your design process on its head. You have to think about what you have and start warehousing materials ahead of time. And it changes how you draw and changes how you design, which isn't necessarily the approach that we learn off the bat. Using softwares like Revit doesn't really account for reclaimed material and things that may be imperfect from the outset. But it does allow for a lot of very interesting aesthetics, and I'm really curious about how we might move in a direction like that. Allowing for design to work with materiality is very difficult when you're working in a theoretical forum, because you're now either making up what material you have and then working under those constraints, or you are, or you're basically just designing what you would like to see and then hoping that the material is there, which I found is almost never the case.
That's really cool that you're challenging yourself to do that.
Thank you so much. I'd love to share some pictures sometime.
Please do.
I think that seems harder to do long term with the, I guess, divide between a lot of school and industry still. because like, yeah, we're definitely not taught like that. And depending on the school you go to, you're just like designing with minimal real world considerations. And you're just like, whatever you want, you can create, and not necessarily having a material that goes in there.
I found that materials actually really sometimes give you an interesting direction, sometimes things that you may not have created otherwise. The materials kind of lend themselves to. One thing that we've done and I've made a commitment to is when trees fall in our forest, we drag them out and mill them up and then store them. And that's how we've been building. I absolutely refuse to buy lumber that I don't know it's sourcing directly. And I found we have an abundance. I only have 5 acres, and a couple of storms come by and a few very big trees come down. And it's been more than enough to do the building on our site that is required. So you always wonder about scalability, but seeing just the land in behind us and having wandered it many, many times, if somebody had been a little bit more cognizant and a little bit less money driven, they would have found that the forest would have continuously given for a lifetime. But even though those trees were maybe only 150 years old, that's still more than a generation, more than a lifetime. My daughter will never see or remember the forest that I remember now. And that's something that really hits me at home. And the other thing that I think about into is no one's ever going to be able to replace the children that were lost. And the very least that I feel we can do is say that we've done enough destruction. And what if we just cleaned up our mess? And that was our penance.
Oh, that was really powerful.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, that one hits me where I have no armor.
Okay, it's good to be vulnerable about this stuff. I think it's like, it's easy to downplay how emotionally exhausting this idea is of having inherited this problem and having to kind of stomach the frustration and stuff. Like it's, I think it's gonna hit you at times. I think it's okay to just acknowledge that it hurts and it sucks and it's scary. But I think the only way things get done about it is if you actually do talk about these things. And otherwise everyone's just too scared and then they just want to pretend like it's not real, it's not happening.
Well, it's interesting that as I listen to you talk, I'm thinking too about how, you know, programs like Revit, in a sense, dehumanize what we do in many ways. And I think that's something that we need to somehow think about and really push back at.
I think I mean, I have other issues with Revit, but it's also, I think, the way that the softwares that we use to design things are coded and designed to think about building in a certain way. And it's so hard to break out of that box when you're forced to you know, translate everything that you're trying to do in your head into this kind of rigid form that thinks about materials in a certain way that maybe isn't actually the direction we should be going in. Like you look at mass timber, like I think we've, at least how I've observed it, mass timber has kind of been lauded as this kind of thing that's going to fix it. But you can't just take, you know, you can't just think about wood in the same way that you thought about steel and concrete, and that is this endless resource that we can just use with abandon. It's not just using different materials, it's thinking about them differently and changing our relationships with them and how we harvest them and how we use them and how we commodify them. right? Like it's not just, wood isn't just this like thing that shows up out of nowhere. Or problems don't get fixed when you just swap one thing to another thing. It's about how we think about all of this.
I think that's so interesting. And just to remind everyone, one of the issues that the Global Studio is really wanting to do is shift the teaching practices and the way we teach, and which will in turn make changes in practice. And I think these things that we're bringing up are really good examples of of areas that need to be changed. And I think it's one of the we've been doing a lot of work with in preparing for the sketching school and in thinking about how to bring other worldviews in right relations, so that we don't sort of cherry pick other worldviews and bring elements into our way of doing things, which effectively is just kind of a reframing of assimilation in a more palatable way, but to how to actually value the different worldviews as unique, and yet the reality that we're all interconnected. And it was really interesting thinking about or listening to Chris, who's from the Oneida Nation and who's been assisting us with that, and talking about it. And my friends at the Splatching Band say the same thing of, in sort of this many worldviews, the human being is sort of at the top of the hierarchy. Whereas as Rosalind, who's one of the knowledge keepers at the Splatching Band, talks about everything sort of on a level playing field. So, the human being doesn't get to assume that they get all these things, and that all these materials are out there in order, for us to use them to the extent that we want. And, to really think about what it means that a rock has the same value as a human being, or, a tree, or that they have the same right to the landscape and as we do. And it completely, shifts the way you think about the sort of the way we tend to feel entitled to use materials and continue to build spaces bigger than we really need. And I was thinking of it in terms of, we were in the sketching school of, like, for example, one of the leaders of the sketching school was giving the example of a rock, and how you can sketch a rock as, with somebody sitting on it, or you can sketch it with somebody leaning against it as a chair, or you can, and I was thinking to myself, what if that always gives the human being the role of protagonist? And what if actually the rock is given the role of protagonist? And what would that drawing then look like if it was actually the rock who was leaning on the human being to really push the boundaries of how we think about things, And I think Sechava, in his lecture on rethinking and really challenging and using the language of a different dimension to think about these things, so that we let go of sort of our current language and really give ourselves the freedom to entirely rethink things. When I was in architecture school, one of the projects we were given the freedom to we had a brief, and then we could frame it however we wanted. And I used the physics principle of parallel universes, and I did my project in 9 parallel universes to sort of look at how they experience, how you would experience the space in 9 different dimensions. And it was really very fascinating, because you really do begin to think about things in a totally different way. Like what does a landscape look like if the tree is actually, you know, the primary species and is arranging human beings as, and using human beings as a way to you know, create their landscapes, and just these really what seem like crazy ideas, but to follow them through. And I think it's a really interesting way to stretch our minds and our design minds.
I really think that's awesome. I've gotten used to learning that people are the unit of measure for, you know, building. If you're going to put a rock beside a person, you know approximately how big the rock is in reference to the person. But are you looking at a stone, or are you looking at a boulder, is a very interesting concept, I would think. And some of the images that went through my mind were like, well, you could have an enormous rock and a tiny little person. And then that scale makes the rock the dominant. And I thought that was really interesting, all the visuals that ran through my mind as you were saying that, Kristen.
Okay, somebody keeps taking my giant birds. Speaking
Sorry,
of,
that was me. I'll put it back. I just thought it was, I thought I had accidentally copied and pasted it.
that was me who copied and pasted it. I was just playing with the relationship between the birds and the person.
Oh, and the guy, gotcha.
The
rest of my workday is going to be so boring in comparison to this.
I know.
I'm at work right now. I'm going to walk out of this meeting room and be like, who wants to talk about carbon? Let's talk about our fundamental relationship with the world. No? Okay, I'll go draw that full plan.
So I guess for me, I keep on coming back to the question on how do we make change? Like, how do we implement change? How do we promote change? How do we be advocates for change? And I also, you know, come back to the question of how does technologies today, because we did talk about technologies and the impact of them, but how does technologies that we do have available today, how can we use them to make positive change? And where do they fit into this whole system of regeneration and regenerative design? So for instance, you know, I worked on a project where the building was going to be passively working without mechanical systems for about 5 months of the year. And so in order to do that type of design, though, we did need to use computer modeling software. We needed to use different technologies that are available to us now today in order to ensure that the building is going to work the way that we anticipated. So I kind of wonder, where does it fit into the cycle of what we're speaking of today?
I think there's still the issue of needing a like common place to put this. Like when people have figured out workflows or good technology that does what we need it to do, not just keeping it for themselves, I guess, sharing it, breaking down the proprietary nature. I wonder who's really in charge of that decision in terms of like, how do you abolish this proprietary issue, even within our own country, as just a starting point, because it's easier to control your own country than others. Because even with like the vaccine, that wasn't necessarily as collaborative of an effort as it could have been. With all the different vaccines that are made and all the different, I guess, applications or side effects or variants that some do and do not. defeat around the world. So I feel like whether it's the provincial legislating bodies of architecture or the national, I feel like something there should be either incentivizing people to share what they know and work collaboratively. I feel like that's still like a barrier because people will still just work in their silos unless there's things like Global Studio and such other collaborative efforts that are happening. It just seems to be a big barrier. And also in terms of like, how do you get other people involved or like sharing knowledge? Technology and like social media and getting word out there is an option, of course, but I think because there's so much competing topics, it's not always as effective. Like it's easy to go past things. So maybe a better way of, I guess, marketing, for lack of a better word, is needed as well. But I think we need to get these legislating bodies to realize that we care about this stuff and start to change some of the requirements to maintain your license or to practice and to build. Like it shouldn't be so easy for people to do that.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point. I think that until people are forced to do it, it becomes a challenge to really get everyone to really commit to it. And so I feel like there needs to be changes in, like you said, the regulators. So the provincial, regulators need to insist that, architects and engineers are following best practices. And then we also need to convince, clients and policymakers that spending a bit more money at this point in time will save them in great deals later. It'll save them environmental costs. It'll save them in, a lot of different impacts later. But I also think there's this kind of duality between understanding the principles of passive design, which are, kind of going down to basics, understanding how, wind is going to flow through a building, and understanding how orientation and heat gain in a building can greatly impact energy and carbon use. And those are simple things that we can use to design. And then in combination with the technologies that we have available, we can even push it even further. I feel like there's this duality we have to instill in education even further.
And I think related to what you're saying, Veronica, as well as what Joy was saying, I think also we need to really sort of challenge even like the UN norms. Like I noticed this, one of your, you referenced them in the manifesto. That's something that when I was doing my PhD work related to sort of spatial justice and how spatial and housing justice and so on, is bodies like the World Bank and the IMF and the UN, they maintain a power structure, a global power structure, and that's very related to capitalism and to white social constructs. And I think we're sort of programmed to assume that what the UN is doing is positive, and they have enormous power to create norms and to establish them, and we need to really take seriously challenging who those norms are actually benefiting, and and those are very difficult things to do. I think we need to take more seriously sort of the power structures and how much those have, impact what we do.
I think it's a very interesting problem that we have these days, and we've got social media that allows us to have our voices amplified, but with so many voices, it feels like screaming into the void sometimes. And if we're trying to make big change, and hopefully I sound more pragmatic than jaded, really it's always about money. Money has this unreal ability to align interests, and thinking about who has all of the money, who has all of the power. I think of an analogy or a strategy that can be applied. And I like thinking about the remora fish. And the remora fish is the tiny little school of fish that picks all of the food out of the teeth of the sharks. And so I think about that going, how can we find a way of, here are all these powerful entities, how can we somehow feed our interests by seemingly serving and or cooperating, but really pulling resources over into this area. So that was one thought I had of basically working in alongside industry to acquire the waste that they would have paid to have go to the landfill, and now you have a selective abundance of lots of material, or finding ways of helping existing polluters to reduce their pollution while supplying resources to the goals that we've talked about, and providing solutions to the UN or any of those entities. And it's really climbing a mountain for sure. It's, you know, could we knock on Greta's door and ask her to you know, campaign on behalf of us, or what kind of things do we need to do to get to a level where you have that loud of a megaphone to be able to speak. It's a lot of interesting work that that can be done in those realms, but I find that the one thing that we can't do is nothing.
Well, I mean, just as an example, I mean, there's so much going on, so much conversation about the equity of vaccine. Yesterday, I read the statistic that 1.75% of all vaccine has gone to the entire continent of Africa, which is, you know, pretty horrifying.
Just a reminder, folks, we're gonna, I think, be reconvening in a couple of minutes. I gave this instruction and I forgot to actually do this at the beginning. Who would anyone like to kind of talk or summarize what we talked about to the main group? I can do it if people aren't feeling up to it, but. Going once, going twice. Look at our cute little collage.
I kind of wanted to make one really quick last point, if I have a minute.
Please do.
Just kind of like thinking about how these ideas in this manifesto can be translated across disciplines, because we talk about this from an architecture point of view, but the impact that a building has more. It has more impact beyond just the construction of a building. We're looking at like what's being put in the building. We're looking at the engineers that work on the building. So taking these practices and looking at them from a very multidisciplinary point of view, and how we can work with that other disciplines and make maybe they have best practices that we can co-opt and use, and we can share with them as well. I think that that's a super important thing to do beyond just, you know, the creation of the building.
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, I was just writing that down. That's a really good the discussion today has given me a lot to think about in terms of how to revisit the manifesto, because we haven't really, like as a group, gone back and, because we learn more every year, right? And it's nice to go back and revisit it and think about how we can work things differently now that we know more. And I think that's a really good one of maybe revising this so it's less architecturally focused, and it actually, because we talk a lot about, or like there's multiple points talking about, you know, working in interdisciplinary ways, but the language is actually conducive to that idea necessarily in all points. And even the point before of talking, I think someone mentioned referring to the UN as kind of an authority on in terms of Indigenous knowledge. And I think I'd like to go back and as a group, maybe revise point 2 to refer more to you know, points of Indigenous wisdom and knowledge and sovereignty, as opposed to just referring to the UN document. I think our understanding of that has grown a lot more over the last year. So that's really, those are 2 things that I've been thoughtful about to revise the document.
The issue of the UN speaks a lot to the sort of hierarchies of knowledge. And I think that's I'm really interested with the Global Studio to challenge is something with my own work in Kliptown in South Africa that we talk a lot about is the hierarchies of knowledge and how we need to level that playing field.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, often as academics, we also tend to think that, you know, our knowledge is, you know, superior to other forms of knowledge. And I think, you know, we need to just totally let go of those kind of that belief system, you know,
yeah, it's a really good point. All right, I'm going to invite everyone to come back into the main room. And we can kind of, I'm curious to see what other people are talking about. I like our little collage. I think it's real cute. All right. Thanks for the great discussion, everyone. This is lovely.
It has been, yes, I agree.
Yeah, a lot of the discussions I have with this are often with other students, and so it's been great to. I know we're all in similar or the same discipline, but I'm always curious to see how someone who's, you know, actively practicing and people who are more in academia and stuff see this. So it's been great. Welcome back, everybody. I know people are slowly trickling back in. How'd it go, Larissa?
It was good. It was really fun. In terms of the collaging, I think we may have got distracted through conversation. But I think, you know, collaging doesn't necessarily have to be a physical thing. It can be a sharing of ideas, and
yeah, it can just be a bunch of scribbles. There wasn't. We weren't intending to make a work to go in an art gallery on this. It's nice to make things and talk at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Welcome back. The land of the living, everyone. I hope that went well. Does somebody from group 1 or a couple of people from group 1 want to kind of give a brief summary of what you guys talked about and the things that you drew?
Yeah, sure. We were just kind of figuring this out as the breakout room was dissolved.
So it was my instruction and I forgot about it.
Yeah, no, we just got right into a conversation and left that to the end. But yeah, I think we'll just kind of walk you through what we've been mind mapping on our board. And just to preface, I think what we began with was looking through the manifestos and then kind of trying to extract some kind of categories, which are kind of indicated here in orange. And then from there, we kind of tried to establish connections between those categories. So I can let Ray and Zoe perhaps speak a little bit more to that discussion.
We really went into talking about human behavior and human psychology. That wasn't necessarily one of the things listed on the manifesto, but it was something that we were interested in. So we just have a bunch of notes here, like brought in the scope to include human equity for all humans, ethics, and human rights. Cultural diversity was one of the things that was mentioned, and just how can we apply this general topic to buildings. Yeah. Ray, do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, to build on that, what we see is that the manifesto is goal-oriented, right? We're trying to accomplish change. And so by breaking that down into some larger categories, how do you actually take that goal and get there? To state these points, and all 12 of them are amazing, you have to create change in either human behavior, how people think about architecture, how people build architecture, and how people use it. So, where can we learn? So we looked at some of the other disciplines where evidence-based decision-making is highly regarded. And then how can we start applying some of those lessons to architectural problem solving? As architects, I think what came up in our conversation is that if we're going to carry out something like it's listed in this manifesto, we have to start evidencing our choices, and we have to start disseminating the information that we use to come to those choices.
And then something also that we briefly touched on is using what we already have and kind of building off that instead of just creating new structures. Because, okay, that's probably about it.
Great, thanks. This is an interesting or a different take to how our group approached this. So it's actually just so lovely to get some outside or a kind of critique of the structure of the manifesto and stuff. This is I hadn't really thought about breaking it into categories and like seeing it in a whole new way through this analysis. So thanks for your thoughts. It's great.
Yeah, it was. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say it was interesting to see those categories kind of come back together as a sort of system and kind of a process of steps that we might kind of use to, to achieve goals, to kind of maybe be a bit more, systematic in kind of how we try to set goals and meet them.
Yeah, because I think the way that it's been written, I think has been more kind of a call to action than an actual instigator of action. And I think it would be really a fun activity, maybe in a future Charrette, to even go back, think about ways that you take this kind of language and actually start thinking about what's next, like what you actually what you do with this.
Yeah, exactly. This kind of felt like looking at a step beyond.
Yeah, that's great.
And oh, excuse me, Brian, did I hear, were you going to add something?
I was just going to say that the connecting element in all of these points in the manifesto is the role of capital in architecture. And I think that's an elephant in the room that needs to be addressed.
Maybe one thing I'll throw in as well. First of all, it was great being with 3 dedicated, clever students. But one of the things we talked about is the manifesto maybe falls into a bit of a trap that Western society falls into, of having everything fragmented and in individual points. And we did talk about, for example, you can see the division of body, mind, and spirit. But we also talked about taking more of a systems perspective and maybe having an opening, a preamble to the manifesto that points to a more holistic, sort of a fuller embrace of the things that are most important, rather than dissecting things out and dealing with what I've argued is endemic fragmentation in Western society. So it's a natural sort of thing, especially in university environments and in professions, to want to sort of distill everything down to manageable parts. But at some point you need to sort of induce, not just deduce. You need to induce and pull it back together and have a sort of high level aspiration. But it was really interesting to go through the process with the students. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great critique. Thanks so much for your thoughts on that.
I'd just like to add in, I think what Ray said is actually critically important. We did talk about it in our group as well, but if we don't change our value system, we will never be able to really effectively address climate change, because again and again, short-term profits are trumping long-term benefits. And it's almost unbelievable how naive we are and ignorant of what the consequences of our current value system is having on every aspect of society, not just the environment, but our employability, for example, our social lives, our quality of life is all suffering because we're simply not paying attention to a really dysfunctional value system.
That's such an interesting point, Douglas. And I think, right now, I know it really brought me up short recently with between, in BC right now and last week going through temperatures that are actually quite inhuman. It hit 43 where I live, and, in a house with no air conditioning, and the fires that are, related to that, as well as, the ongoing COVID pandemic, which we're sort of beginning to use the language that that's over, but for most of the world, they're still very much a part of it, as well as the discovery of the graves and the unmarked graves of the children, which are a direct relationship to the mechanisms of assimilation and in colonialism, and how all of those relate to capitalism, actually. Yeah, we were talking in our group about, how, as humans, we need to often be pushed into the corner to actually make change, and that, hopefully the silver lining of some of these things that we're dealing with right now are that we actually begin to acknowledge the fact that this isn't something off in the future. We're actually there now, and we have to start doing something, not just talking, but doing something.
Yeah, and Jennifer Cutbill in our group actually mentioned some of the work that David Fortin and Adrian Blackwell are doing about land, and they gave a talk at the REIC festival last week, which was both brilliant and scary in the way that land has been used as a tool to manipulate all sorts of things, and it's continuing to this day in the speculation on land right across the country and around the world.
Yeah, I think in the conversations around colonialism, we have to be really careful that we don't, frame that as a history, because the reality is it's ongoing.
Yeah.
Someone, I think, sorry, go Larissa.
I was going to say, I think, yeah, Douglas was in our group too. So I was going to say, this is a perfect segue into kind of talking about some of the things that we discussed. And I think there's 3 manifesto points that I think we kind of collectively talked about that really stood out to us. And that was second one, talking about UNDRIP, the third one, advocating for design communities and sustainability towards regenerative perspective. And then the third one was kind of understanding how our physiology mimics our environment. I think a lot of our conversations and what we were kind of talking about really did do, like Douglas had mentioned earlier, we kind of were really talking about how economics and land and the way that different people have relationships to land. And we had Jennifer, who in our group, who had to step out and who shared a ton of great resources, which has kind of led us to starting to use the other supernatural people, but we're going to be sending out a resource email of some great things that were shared with us by Jennifer that I'm sure everyone, if you're interested in this, that you'll be interested in as well. So keep an eye open for that email coming out later. And so we're just kind of talking about different ways of building land and having different relationships to the environment. And in our group, we had Anirim, who's coming from in Egypt right now, and then Jesse, who came from New Zealand. So it was kind of nice to get some like perspectives on regenerative design and some different approaches to like working with Indigenous people from outside of Canada, I know I suffer from getting a little closed in sometimes. I don't know if Jesse and Nareem want to share some of their discussion points with the larger group.
I mentioned about New Zealand seems to be going quite, I actually don't know if they have, you know, legislative, like they've incorporated UNDRIP into the, like the national sort of government. But I think a lot of people are going that way, or a lot of professionals are going that way, and especially, you know, students. And so they're kind of ahead of the government. And so I sort of shared a resource, or I shared a story of, there was an airport in one of the small towns that collaborated really closely with the Māori people in the area. And the product was this like beautiful airport that really almost embodies that whole idea of not just tokenism with Indigenous people, but actually like partners, and brings their stories into the wider narrative. And I thought that was a really good example of how perhaps number 2 in the manifesto could be seen like on a global level, or on a, you know, a wider level. So yeah.
I think it is essential to respect the environment and the natural effect, as well as to innovate the material that can be used to build to construct the building, and then to reduce the negative impact of that material on the environment and the humans, such as replace concrete material in sand environment by using the bicycles bacteria as with sand as a replacement of concrete, to make it as a basic to construct building in that environment. And we have to respect the effects of the environment and the material we have in our environment. We can make it in our building, not blind our eyes about the material and the effects of the environment. Like in Egypt, some buildings has its facade, a lot of glasses in its facade, and that have warmer impact in the building and the humans inside the building. And it's more negative, and that make us use a lot of air condition and another negative impact on the environment. We have to respect our environment and use building related to the effects of our environment. I think that.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, in terms of what we've produced, I think Jesse had a little thing on the board that people can go in and look at. But yeah, we had some great conversations. I'm also just sending out in the chat an invitation from Jennifer. I think some of you may be aware of the Architects Declare, but I'm just passing it along to everybody else to sign up for. And yeah, this was really fun. My brain's buzzing a little bit. Sorry, I'm just overwhelmed with knowledge a little bit. So we can move on to group 3. Unless Douglas had anything he wanted to mention from group 2.
No, thank you, Larissa. I thought you did a great job.
Yeah, we can move on to group 3. I'm just going to tack on to Nermeen's point, because it was kind of in line with a lot of the things that we talked about, where what you were saying is kind of making me think of how buildings are kind of this tool that humans have used to show how like kind of exert dominance over the world and like over the environment, and that, you know, like you can make a fully glass tower in the middle of an incredibly hot climate because humans are so great that we don't even need to care about the rules of the of like how nature works and how weather works and all these things, and that we don't need to care about where our materials come from because the world's for us and all of these resources are they're made for us, so why would we use them however we want? So it's yeah, that's a really good point of just thinking about I guess the dominance or this centering man as like the center of the universe. So that, and that was a lot of the talking, a lot of the talking that we were doing in our group, in part of Kristen's addition to our little diagram was just making a very tiny person and very large birds, and just kind of, I guess, questioning how everything, or how we consider or position everything on Earth in comparison to ourselves, and that that we're like the most important measuring factor on Earth, which isn't necessarily true at all, and kind of questioning, you know, the importance and the scale of our own importance and agency in comparison to agency of other living and even non-living things. Does anyone, we wanted to do more of a diagram that was a little more cyclical, kind of thinking about, I guess, our relationship and more of a cycle with other systems. So we were thinking about how we can critique, you know, our own place in that cycle, and whether we're in the center of it or whether we're actually a part of it. Like, is there anybody from group 3 that wants to talk a little bit about what we discussed? Maybe Veronica or Kristen or Joy, even if she's still here.
I can maybe just add, first of all, thank you. I think this was like really exciting to participate in the charrette. But I think, you know, another aspect that we were discussing was how do we actually implement change, and how do we work collectively as a group to use all of our specialties and use all of the knowledge that we have to not only share knowledge with each other, but also then make change. I think one of the questions we had, and one of the discussions we had early on in our charrette discussion, was where to find knowledge and how to disseminate that knowledge so that we can actually use it. And that was kind of one aspect of it. And also, how do we, use, traditional techniques, passive techniques, and in combination with where does the advancements of computers sit within that? Where does the advancements of different programs that allow us to take the knowledge that we do know in terms of things like natural ventilation and orientation, but then test it to ensure that it fits in properly. But I think we started off with the circle because it was an idea of everything's interconnected, and it kind of goes back to Brian's point earlier on about systems and how do we look at the aspects that we're dealing with. Is it all integrated? Is it systematic, or is it kind of components? And I think we have to consider the full life cycle of what we're dealing with here to understand what is the right way forward.
I think related with that, Veronica, is how we were talking about to really challenge ourselves and come up with new ways of really pushing our thinking, because we think we're pushing our thinking, but we're not actually pushing our thinking. And so how do we, and to challenge the norms, like we were talking about the roles of, like the UN and the IMF and the World Bank and so on, and as the creators and disseminators of norms, and yet those are norms with very much of an agenda, and it tends to be a global North agenda and a capitalist agenda. And so, how do we, for example, is it the UN norms that we want to be following, or are there other norms, or even move away from the notion of norms and begin to look at, really look at alternative values. And I was sharing that I once did a design project in school in 9 parallel universes, using the physics theory, and to really push myself to like look at the same thing in 9 really fundamentally different ways. And it's just, I think, a really interesting exercise. And it's why, like, playing around with scale in our collage here, and having a bird sit on the rings of Saturn and a person dancing on the on the planet, and begin to like put the insect. If we actually look at the insect and the impact that it's having on our forest, visually look at it at that scale, and begin to understand those things. And as I was listening to several of the people talking about, bringing about change. I know one of the things, I used to live in New Mexico, where climate is you're already living on the edge of extreme climate, and yet banks wouldn't loan on, they have parameters of what they'll loan on for new construction, and they won't loan on higher upfront costs that will reduce the long-term cost of the building, but also the long-term energy usages and so on the building. And so how do we begin to really address the bigger things that are influencing architecture? And I just think the Global Studio is such an opportunity for us to really begin to push these ideas, and so I'm very excited about some of what I've been hearing and how that can inform, like the curriculum change, which is one of the other goals of the Global Studio.
I can close out, but Joy or Laura, do you, either of you want to return to any points that were talked about? You guys both had some really wonderful things to say, but if you're are tired of talking, that's fine.
I'm okay, but thanks.
Okay. I guess it's been, yeah, we had our conversation went all over, and it was so lovely to listen in, and got some really valuable insight on how to maybe revise this manifesto. And it's great that this thing is that was made a few years ago, has remained this living document, and got so many great points on how to revise this. Especially, I mean, our group, I think the biggest point that came out for me was the questioning of or challenging of hierarchies of knowledge, which Kristen mentioned, of like maybe like revising point 2 to talk more about like centering Indigenous like knowledge and sovereignty, as opposed to necessarily just referring to the UN or like these large international institutions as a point of reference, like actually trying to look at different ways of hierarchy and authority in terms of when we get knowledge and questioning those. Yeah, this is really, I guess we can, we're getting close to the end of the 90 minutes, or we're just over the 90 minutes. So I guess we can start wrapping up. And if anybody wants to stick around for maybe like 20 or 15 or 20 minutes afterwards, just to maybe like throw out some ideas that they may have gotten for a Global Studio logo, because I think in all of these groups, a lot of the overarching ideas of Global Studio have been discussed, and our creative brains are up and going. So I guess thanks everyone for coming. This has been lovely, and it's our first event back in a year. So I'm relieved that it went smoothly, and that there's been so much great discussion across all the groups and so many great perspectives brought in. I don't know if I'm going to be able to focus on work for the rest of the day because I'm just going to be thinking about all the wonderful points that everyone brought up. And I don't know, it's nice to be inspired. It's easy to, I think, feel a little isolated and like you have to kind of suppress the things that the frustrations you're feeling and the thoughts that you have when you're kind of trying to navigate these systems that we're so frustrated by and that are causing this crisis, and feeling like you have to suppress all these feelings and that you're the only one feeling them. And so it's really great to be in a group of really excited, curious people who bring all sorts of knowledge and experience to the table, and really feel like rather than just sitting around thinking about stuff, you can actually get a bunch of like-minded people together and actually do something about it, as opposed to just screaming into the void by yourself. If there's any other closing thoughts, please feel free to say them.
Adrian, could I jump in and just share an image for a minute about a really exciting thing we're doing next week, which is also speaking of imaginative and beautiful things. Can people see that image of the Grove? Are you seeing the image of the Grove?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to let you know that next week on the 14th at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, we're really excited because one of the team members from the Living Systems Architecture Group, which is a Toronto-based group and who is currently has this beautiful installation at the Venice Architecture Biennale, is going to take us for a live tour. And so we'll be able to see the installation, ask questions. And so I know I am super excited to, I was at the Art Biennale a couple of years ago and just so inspired. And so I'm really excited. And so that email invitation should be going out today. And also just as a reminder, you can always find these things at the, if you go to the, our main page at our architecture program at Athabasca, and then there's a news in the top left margin, there's a link to the latest news and activities, and you can always find all of the announcements about what we're doing and the registration link at that. So I just wanted to let everybody know about this.
Thank you for that, Kristen. One of the other things I just wanted to add in, one of the takeaways from today is that there's so many good resources that people were sharing with each other. In the Global Studio, we have to figure out a way to make all of those resources easily accessible. And we're going to be meeting later this week, hopefully, about how we could build a better kind of website that would give us a vehicle to collect all of those things. And so that's what we were hearing today was just spectacular in terms of all. I mean, I learned a tremendous amount, and we've got to figure out a way to share it.
Maybe just following up on that, on Doug's point, question for you, Adria. So is there going to be a follow-up where you guys at Supernatural go away, take all this information, modify, revise the manifesto, and then share it back with the participants and of course others beyond this group?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we haven't had a formal discussion about it, but I think, I mean, that's definitely something that's been on my mind throughout the discussion today is, and the manifesto has been a really great, I think, way of collaborating with people and getting feedback from people and growing over our existence. And so it's meant to be shared. And I have, I mean, I know I have a lot of thoughts. I imagine Jen and Larissa have a number too. And so it'd be really great to come back together, maybe when we're actually all back in school together in September, and revise this. And I mean, we've all grown a lot over the last year and a half since we've visited this. So it'd be great to revise this and then send it back out and continue to get feedback, because it's invaluable, and it's a way that we all learn, and it's kind of it allowed us to all connect today too. So hopefully continue to do that.
Thank you.
I think just to jump in, to ask people to think as well, You know, one of the goals of the Global Studio is to create curriculum content, course content. And so to also think how what we've talked about today could inform our learning practices. Because I know it's been very inspiring to listen to everybody's ideas, but also it's sort of in the back of my mind started simmering away about, okay, so how a lot of these ideas are very relevant to how we, you know, how we teach architecture and learn architecture and practice architecture and just inhabit spaces. So I think if people could also, and you know, I'm happy for you to email me with any ideas or suggestions, or when we get, if we did get back together again, you know, we could think about it in those terms as well.
Yeah, I guess just in a closing point, I think in our group, we were talking a lot about sharing resources and trying to get the knowledge that's out there connected with the people who want and need it. And so I think the use of a website or a way that we can compile even, you know, the recording of this discussion today is so important, that these discussions don't just stay in a void. And we also, you know, we have some evidence as a result of these collages of our discussion that will help us kind of remember the points that we made. And I know it's very, it's personally important to me that we don't just get together on a Zoom call, we have these great conversations and then we like log out and go on about our day and then nothing changes. And so it's, and also that it just stays within the people, stays within our group, that it's important that all the wonderful resources and knowledge that we have here get shared with everyone here and also beyond. Because I think that's definitely a shared goal across everyone here, is that that this doesn't stay in isolation.
I totally agree with you, Adrian. Yeah.
Right, I guess on that note, we can conclude. If there's anyone that wants to stick around for a few minutes and maybe just we can jot down some ideas or do some quick sketches of maybe any logo ideas that people came up with throughout the collage exercise. But other than that, I can let everyone else go off into their day, and I can send them off with a lot of gratitude for showing up and offering wonderful insight and critique. I've learned a lot today, and I hope everyone else did too. So thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks, and thank you, Adrian, for organizing, and all of you from Supernatural. I know it takes a lot of, it all seems very simple on the day, but it takes a lot of organizing and time, and we're all busy, and you guys have had a lot going on with your ending of school and starting of work.
Everybody does.
So, thank you for all the work you've done as well.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, we're looking forward to the next 3 events. It's not over yet.
That's right.
Kristen, are you feeling like, do you have any, do you want to start with some logo ideas, or are you actually feeling like that would be better for another day? I'm not sure how you're feeling about that.
I think that'd be great. I agree with you. And, you know, we've been having such really interesting discussions, and I think one of the things we brought up was, you know, in this grant proposal, we sort of had the 3 focuses of regenerative design, inclusive design, and diversity in design, education, and practice, and how, I mean, to me, in the proposal, that those, you know, like was mentioned, they were separate points, and like, how do we get away from those separate points and, you know, really look at things more in a systemic and interconnected and ecosystem way. And I think that would be an interesting idea to bring into the logo maybe. And so yeah, I don't know if we want to start by just having a conversation, or we want to talk about, we can kind of create move to the right on the Miro board and start to just, people can start putting some visual ideas into what a logo, might look like.
Just writing down some points of things that you said, because that's good. And I that was such a good point from Brian of moving away from this itemization of ideas and trying to think of a way where they actually have like a, they don't have a linear relationship. They have cyclical and reciprocal relationships where they all inform each other. It's not just a list of things.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, I think, emerged from this conversation today, that all those, like, these are all, I mean, they're written as 3 separate points, but they're actually kind of all the same thing. You can't really have one without the other two.
Well, and I think, that same sort of idea has come up in people's comments about really wanting things to be more interdisciplinary, and how do we make that happen? Because I think, alongside the sort of hierarchies of knowledge that we talked about, we're also have a tendency to be very protective of the boundaries of our professions, because we draw our identity from that, and so on. And so how do we begin to get away from those ideas and erase those boundaries and blur them? And again, I think, say, Chava went in his discussion and bringing in the, the notion of a design school in a different dimension, and it reminded me of my project back in school, and of how do we really fundamentally look at things differently, and get away from the trap of just reframing things in more palatable ways, because I think even with the best intentions, that often ends up being what happens.
I think we can draw from the name itself, right? Like, think of what the word super, as in plus extra, right? And then natural. So we're expanding on what we consider to be nature, to include things like the built environment and the natural environment as a singular thing, to include in our education, the idea is that there's the human element from psychology, behavior, economics, taking all those disparate things and including them as one subject, supranatural. Is there ways that we could show that? Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like I'm like designing like a global studio logo and a supernatural logo in my head at the same time right now.
I've done a fair amount of identity projects.
Pardon?
So I've worked on a fair amount of identity projects, developing brands, logos, identity kits. Is there any, like, are we making a hard decision as to whether we're going to go symbol, word mark? Are we just going to explore all the options until one fits?
I'm not sure. I'm going to take Kristen's lead on this one.
I'm not going to put any sort of sort of controls on it. So I think, let's play around with different ideas and see. I'm just kind of working on, even just getting away from listing this and putting these points around a circle instead of having them in a list, and just what that brings to mind as I do that.
I was just gonna add, but maybe because this is like a global studio, and in terms of expanding maybe our reach and getting like more people involved or aware of what we're doing, I feel like somewhere the logo should say global studio and not just be like an icon or something, just so that one can easily like search it back and be able to follow along. But I think also somehow to show some symbol of like reciprocity, because in a lot of conversations that we've had, it's not just like we were trying to challenge hierarchy to a certain degree, and how everyone has something to offer. Not just the student versus teacher, but like you can learn something from the student or who you're collaborating with, depending on who that is. I guess the only symbol, yeah, I'm not sure really how to go about this, but something that shows something to do with reciprocity. And of course, not just having it be, like, in my opinion, not just a symbol so that one can actually trace it back and see what that is. Though I guess you can Google search images now, so.
I tend to agree with you on that, Joy. I think that'd be good. It's interesting, even just doing this little practice that I'm doing over here, I found myself like, I started by just taking the whole phrase of regenerative design and putting it by the circle, and then realizing why does regenerative and design even have to go together, you know, and really beginning to take these things apart and mix them up together and see what comes out of that.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I think that's something in the graphics that we were exploring in this kind of collaging exercise, something from that really stands out to me as being quite powerful is this play with scale. I think that there's something really kind of simple and eloquent about how we went about, especially in group 3 here, kind of juxtaposing different elements of the natural environment and scaling them a little bit more in terms of how they interact than in terms of their just physical size. I think that maybe there's something in that could be pushed and pulled.
I totally agree with you. Does anybody know from just a Miro standpoint how you can either like turn, is there a capability to turn or mirror an image or word?
Mirror an image? I'm not sure.
You know, just like turn it upside down or turn it.
Well, you can rotate it. You can rotate stuff.
Is there, I tried to just select it, and you know, usually that little turn handle comes up, but I didn't see that happening. Is there another way to rotate things?
I think that's the only, what are you trying to rotate?
Well, earlier I was trying to rotate. Wait, our Saturn's lost.
Oops, sorry, I think I might have accidentally lost trying to rotate it.
If we were trying to explain what the global studio is to somebody who has no idea about architecture, no idea at all, a complete alien, what would we want to tell them? Like, what's the take-home point that they need to know to really understand what we're doing?
Okay. I think that's a really good question. It's almost like when somebody asks me exactly what does that word mean, I always have this almost unbearable urge to look it up in the dictionary. Because we sort of assume knowledge until we have to actually articulate it. And then it's like, I think to me, the interesting things about the Global Studio and what it's trying to do is become a platform that really engages with groups from around the world. I mean, you know, like today, most of us, I think, are in Canada, but often when we do this, we are sitting having casual conversations and discussions with people who are all over the world. And I mean, that's really quite phenomenal. And to actually get those perspectives, because, and the very human and everyday perspectives, because I think that begins to become a mechanism to challenge, like what we were talking about, of say the norms of, because a lot of norms in truth are based on the global north and often white experience of the everyday. And so to really hear from people in other parts of the world and other cultural and racial backgrounds of their everyday experience of inhabiting space, designing space, you know, availability of materials, of climate issues, you know, like I think is something that's incredibly valuable and something that, you know, is talked about, but that we have the ability to do that, but there are actually very few practical ways in which that's done. And so I think to me, that's one of the real strengths of the Global Studio is to be able to do that, which I think we're beginning to do. But I think the next challenge for it is to, how do we move beyond talking and actually implement things? And so, and I think that that's where, like when I was just saying, you know, we can maybe think about taking ideas from what we've done today and bringing them into the conversation of course content and curriculum change, because that, you know, that's a long-term avenue of change, but it is a very powerful avenue of change, is to change the education practices. And so, and then, but also, you know, I think the Global Studio is incredibly interesting because across Canada and and across South Africa now, practitioners can get their continuing education points for attending our Global Studio activities. And so it's becoming this really interesting intersection of practice and academia. And there aren't a lot of those, is quite frankly. You know, we talking about silos, and that's not just architecture. You know, as a researcher myself, I get really frustrated that, you know, we do all this amazing research and it never gets beyond discussing it with other academics. And, you know, how do we actually implement some of these things? And how do we like include practitioners into the conversations so that we actually have a conversation about how do we begin to integrate these into our practices in firms? You know, I mean, we used to joke in school and staying in touch with fellow students, how we'd go to work for a firm and all of the sort of innovative, imaginative things we were doing in school, you never got to do in practice because, you know, people don't, you know, the argument is people don't want to pay for that. It's billable hours. You don't have time. There's no budget. And yet, you know, as Douglas said, somehow we have to move beyond budget of things, you know, looking at things that allowing everything to be driven by the budgets, because, you know, things aren't changing largely for that reason. So I think those are some of the things that to me stand out. I'd love to hear as well what other people you know, how are thinking about the Global Studio.
I just wanted to pick up on that thread about kind of what we do in practice
and how it kind of like really ties into something that was discussed in our group was that what we do in practice and produce in practice kind of really speaks to what our values are. And I think like where you were talking about how it's about billable hours and budgets and stuff, as opposed to kind of what that final end product is, I think kind of speaks to some values of the profession a little bit, which I think need to adjust and refocus and change a little bit, which I think is also one of the threads here. I did want to maybe just bring some attention to some ideas I had about kind of how to graphically create this in a logo. I was thinking maybe down at the bottom here, if there's like different ways where we can kind of, I like the idea that people are talking about like with these different scales. So I like put some different circles and different scales to kind of represent different things, but then having the things that tie them all together be these like kind of lines of interconnectedness, as opposed to being putting the things that interconnect them in bubbles. I might be, sorry, I'm a little under caffeinated still. So maybe not thinking as clearly, but just kind of some different ways of like rethinking and looking at just incorporating that into our logo practice as well.
Yeah, I like that some of these are kind of finding ways of playing with hierarchy and playing with dimension too, like the one that kind of took the one that's kind of a little bit more chaotic and then kind of made it look like it was it's three-dimensional somehow. Yeah, I think there's some good ideas here in terms of how we. And I'm still, I think personally, I'm still trying to. I think I'm still trying to unlearn this tendency that I've learned through many years of design school that things need to be like super ordered and symmetrical and really clear and concise. So it's fun seeing some of these examples to remind me that I think there's ways to think outside the box that I'm not always necessarily thinking.
One of the things I wanted to share was that one of the really critical aspects I think of the Global Studio is exactly what is happening today with Supernatural and with the AEDE and the workshops that they're doing or have done. And the reason being that we've what I was so impressed about when we first started to learn about Supernatural is that they were proactive about wanting to make change to their own curriculum. And it seems to me a lot of us faculty members and academics actually have to step back a little bit and empower students to make the necessary changes because clearly our generation has failed to do that. And so we need to create an environment in which that can happen, not just with the AEDE and not just with Supernatural, but hopefully with student groups all over the world, that we can provide them with a framework and the tools to change their own curriculum for the better.
Yeah, I can definitely sympathize with that idea of just that's been one of the wonderful things about like speaking from a student perspective, being involved with Global Studios, feeling like it's nice feeling heard. Like I think it's frustrating kind of going through school and feeling like you're kind of trying to push and force an institution to change in a way that it doesn't necessarily want to change. And always not necessarily knowing how to navigate that. And it's been so great with Global Studio and with working with the RACF FASCA, just getting connected with, like, being given resources and tools to do things ourselves as opposed to waiting for someone else to do it. And it's been so nice being encouraged to do that, like having people open doors and encourage you to, like, that even though it gets frustrating sometimes, it's worth doing. And it's not like a futile effort to want to make things better and to have people kind of cheer you on in the background and actively give you platforms and discuss things with you. That's been one of the my favorite things. It's just getting to connect with all sorts of amazing people doing amazing work that I wouldn't have known about otherwise. I'm feeling like I get to be supported by and support those people.
I would also say, looking towards the future, the Global Studio is got a small award from SSHRC, but there's much bigger programs that if we're successful and we do things, we're building a kind of a structure here, which could be much, we may be able to access in a couple of years a lot more funding from things like the SSHRC Partnerships Program, which is, I mentioned earlier, was $5 to $7 million, or a couple of $1 million over 5 to 7 years. And that would allow us to make incredible changes, or provide at least the funding to make incredible changes. So I would also say, think to the future of what you might want to accomplish too, and think big.
You want to go till maybe 9:50, or not 9, quarter after the hour? I keep forgetting people are in different time zones. Like quarter past, or do you want to go till 20 past? I think I'm gonna have to head out soon.
Like, oh, you mean we have to stop doing this? I'm
I
like,
guess that's true. I guess I don't have to be here for this. It's true. I
feel like
the supernatural part's done, so I don't. You guys don't listen to me. You guys can go as long as you want.
I just mean I feel like a kid with a coloring book, and I'm just.
I know. I love being able to like do this collaboratively with other people. Really nice. Just feeling like you have a giant sheet of paper that everybody can just doodle on.
And I think actually this is, I'm so appreciative that you did this, and because I think it's a really good lesson to a reminder of, to do more of these kind of interactive things, and they don't necessarily have to be sort of huge activities, but just like throw some, like, for example, throw an invitation out there that, okay, we're going to have a Zoom time and a Miro board and a couple conversation points, and how to play around with those creatively. And I just think sometimes we forget how important doing that is, especially I think right now when with COVID, a lot of people are feeling a bit isolated. And also just the way we learn at AU, people have, a lot of our students, a common comment is that people feel isolated, students feel isolated. And, just doing quick activities like this that could be a way to address some of those things.
And it's nice to have kind of a documentation of these conversations too, right? And it's also, I think, I personally felt over the last year, like in Zoom calls, I feel like silence is like especially uncomfortable and like taboo. Like normally, like you can be in a room with people and not say something and it's fine. But when you're in a Zoom call and everything goes quiet, it's like supercharged, and it's nice being able to do something else and like make steps together and think through doing something, as opposed to having to just fill the airspace with whatever comes to your mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's nice to have quiet mean that people are thinking and doing something, as opposed to people are awkward and feeling tired.
this is such a different process that I usually take to designing logos. It's usually, you know, a couple of days of reading, image gathering, rather than just jumping right into the construction board.
I think I'm going to have to step out because I have a work meeting in about 15 minutes. Thankfully, I'm already here, but still. This was so lovely. Thank you everybody for coming and sticking around to do some logo workshopping and for being generous with your thoughts and time. And I'll be in touch with Kristen and Douglas soon, and Ray as well. I think the suggestion that Brian had to do like a collaborative revision of the manifesto was a really good one. And following the discussion today, I think that would be a really fun exercise to do, even just outside, even not necessarily as like an official event or anything. It would just be a lot of fun to do that. So yeah, thanks everyone. I'm gonna go off into my day, but I'll be in touch soon. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. I'm gonna have to jump out as well, but this was a lot of fun. I'll check back on the Miro board later and see what people
So,
have fun doodling.
will we lose the connection if both you guys go?
No, it's my,
Kristen's
it's my Zoom, so we're fine.
It's her party. We're
It's
just
okay.
we're just visitors.
They're just crashing. They're just the crashers.
Thanks everyone. It was nice to meet you all. Have a great day.
Thanks
Pleasure.
everyone.
Thank you.
I'm gonna head out too, but until
Bye.
next time.
Bye, Joy. Thanks so much.
Bye, Joy. Thank you for your input.
Bye-bye.
Well, what we could do, Kristen, moving forward is just as was suggested for the manifesto, perhaps we could start sharing designs to the group and let it an interaction happen, as people may want to bring in other tools as well.
That sounds great. We can either continue it on this Miro board, which is nice in the sense that the people who participated today already have this link, or, you know, we now have an account with Miro, so we can, you know, create as many boards as we want. And, but I think that's a really great idea. And again, something to think about on our website is, you know, having active projects so that, you know, everybody in the Global Studio community can just go on the website and see what activities are going on and jump in and participate in them. But also, Ray, I'd love to take you up on your I don't know if it's an offer, but I'm articulating it as an offer, to, you know, to pick your brain and your knowledge of, you know, having done a lot of sort of this kind of work.
Yes, it's an offer. And I'm happy to bring my skill sets to this team. Like, as a newcomer to architecture at the educational level, what I've seen for Global Studio is just mind-blowing. It's just as rich as what I see out of the Harvard Graduate Design School, but missing the pretension, and I freaking love it. So.
And sorry, Ray, can you just introduce yourself, of a bit of your background and what you're doing and so on?
Oh, yeah. So I'm at this point, almost 20-year veteran of design industry. I've worked in almost every sector except for architecture. Right now, I spend most of my time doing web development and user experience. I help brands do a better job of communicating their services and products, and then capitalizing on that. I know it's bad, and help people buy more than they need to. Geez, I really don't know what to say. I'm sorry, I was a bit surprised here. Yeah, I've been a graphic artist for a long time, and I'm working on my BSc in architectural sciences, with intentions on going on to a master's.
Well, it would be great to have have you involved. I don't know if anybody wants to talk a little bit about what they're doing. I can start. I really like this one here that has this sort of really interconnected feeling of that we've been talking about. But I find it a bit I don't want to use the term dehumanizing because, and this has come up a couple times in my mind in our conversation this morning, because that centers the human again. But I don't know of a word that is like dehumanizing, but for all creatures. So, so I copied and pasted that, and I've been working on this one, which begins to populate it.
I do really like this idea of moving away from the traditional highly ordered forms and going into this like really organic, wild and scribbled kind of feel. Like I like that as a symbol for how much the global studio covers. And I like the fact that we have like several different scale of spheres. I was wondering, how could we take that and then abstract it, break it down into just showing that same idea with fewer elements?
I like that it looks almost spherical, but it's hard to define as a sphere. Or it's not really defined as a sphere.
Because we operate across the world, right? Like we have participants from South Africa, Italy, Australia, New Zealand, Egypt. What are some like globally recognized symbols for things like unity or knowledge?
That was in our group 3, the sort of holding of hands was one that we came up with for the idea of unity. And I think one of the really recurring things that I have heard from our lecture series from people from different parts of the world is the ability for people to have the ability to recognize themselves in an image, or in an architectural rendering in that building. So, that's something we've been trying to bring in as we work with developing the sketching school, is how do we represent architecture and the built environment. In a sense, I almost prefer the term the built environment because it doesn't imply a single discipline. And so that when, whether it's the actual imagery of the human form, like we're going to have one of the modules for the sketching school, just to get you guys totally excited, is going to be just on drawing the human figure in architecture. And we're going to have, people like Seitaba do, who, for those of you who haven't been to his lecture, he is a colleague of mine from South Africa, and his lineage is the Khoisan, and he does his research on traditional culture and bringing that into that knowledge system into spatial design. We're going to have, we're hoping to have Chris Cartwright, who's been joining us from the Oneida Nation, who does, if any of you should I would recommend to all of you to look up his work. It's just phenomenal. And you know, for him to do, so there, each of them is going to do like a 15-minute session on how to think about architectural representation and the human form in architectural representation. And so it's, and they're going to be, I think, four different people who are going to, from different worldviews of, and different locations, of how we represent things so that people can see themselves there, you know. I know even myself, because I work in South Africa, and I work on a project, or I co-founded a project with some colleagues in a community there. And like I tend to do the web design and stuff for it. And, you know, my aesthetic tends to be very minimalist and very, very quiet colors and black and white colors. And yet the reality is there to have lots of color and messiness and to, you know, it's been a really interesting practice to realize how hard it is for me to do that. You know, I'm always wanting to like, oh, but this would be great in white, or oh, this would be great in black. And in fact, make myself do it in orange or red or, you know, purple, or which to me is just like screaming. And I'm just like, ooh, and, you know, and yet for Thabang or one of my other friends, they're just like, wow, yeah, that's looks fantastic. And I'm just, you know, and so to really make ourselves do that, because they don't, and to realize that Thabang doesn't necessarily feel comfortable in my black and white creation. And, you know, so, and just the extent to which we do that and the psychology behind it and the, you know, I think it becomes really interesting.
I can relate, Kristen. When I was living in Cape Town, for the first couple of weeks, I was just shocked by the amount of color, the vibrancy of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And the sound, you know, like that's one of, that's in the process of, you know, the last 25 years post apartheid in South Africa. I mean, that's something I repeatedly hear people say is that I go back and forth between, I spend, you know, a lot of time in Soweto because that's where my projects are. But then, you know, you go into white neighborhoods and people complain about the noise, you know, people, you know, the fact that, you know, people's music is loud and they're spilling out onto the street and, you know, and that sort of discomfort with that sort of public, more public, messy way of living.
Mm-hmm. I guess it's on a personal note, my partner is South African. She was born there, comes from Durban. So we've spent quite a bit of time back and forth between Canada and there, and culturally it's so vibrant and so wild. And it's very, very different than what we white people experience living in North America. It's a bit of a shock. And communal, it's the one thing I've really noticed, especially in any of the colored neighborhoods, because those divisions still exist, especially when you look at it through an economic lens.
Oh, absolutely they do. Absolutely they do. Do you think there's any worth in us sort of looking at the different images people are starting to create and talk about what we like and don't like about them? Or not, like isn't the right word, but what we think is strong or powerful about each. And
if we've got like a series of criterion that we're actually, like, we should decide on that part before we decide whether something works, doesn't work, communicates strongly, doesn't communicate strongly. The emphasis here is to kind of encapsulate what the global studio means, right?
Yeah.
Like we want that to be able to put whatever that logo is on something and have that properly communicate what the organization's about and what it does. So I think if we can narrow down to a few adjectives or just a few core concepts, then we have something to work from or towards. And I mean, discovery, we go through this process and find that none of that works. You can start out and start over.
An idea that I sort of have been kind of mulling over is, I think I can't remember the indigenous group out east, but they have that symbol of like the two peoples in agreement with each other, where they have like the ribbon. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like the ribbon, and it's got like the two lines. And one represents like one people and one represents the other people, and they kind of go like they are. I wish I could actually explain how it works, but something about that. Have none of you heard of that? That symbolism? What's that?
I'm not sure I am aware of it.
Okay. It looks something like the middle, like the straight thing there.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's indigenous symbolism, so I don't think it's something that you can like we could just appropriate, I guess. But that I was just kind of wondering how, like, if the global studio kind of embodies like this, the core behind that, but I need to actually look it up more to see exactly what I was kind of picturing. The body of like, oh yeah, I need to think it through a little bit more before I can articulate it. But
yeah. I think that's one of the beauties of keeping these Miro boards is sort of ongoing. Is I do the same. As an idea, it like hatches an idea, but I'm a slow thinker, so I'm good at just being able to say, "Wow, let's do this," and I need to think about it for a while. And
as soon as I started trying to articulate it, I'm like, "Oh yeah, no, I haven't really got that idea yet."
That resonates with me. I've done that before.
I actually need to go.
Okay.
But thanks everyone. Good to see you again, Kristen. Good to see you again, Douglas.
You too, Jesse.
And nice to meet you, Ray.
Nice to meet you too, Jesse.
All right, see ya.
So as people are maybe heading out, let's keep this going, Kristen, both with the Miro board, but also emailing any kind of ideas that people have out to the larger group for comments and suggestions. And maybe we can do a kind of a co-opetition where people can even feel free to suggest, well, why don't we put this idea together with that idea and see what we might get, so that we can continue this dialogue.
That sounds great. And we can also maybe get in the habit of, at the beginning of each of the Global Studio activities, we can just kind of have a quick run through of what active, whether they're Miro board activities or whatever are going on, and just to remind people and also make them feel welcome to join in and put their inputs. And because I think that's something that came up in our group quite a lot is you read about things or hear about things, and then there's so much going on, those just sort of fall to the side, and you're onto them, you never really hear about them again or follow up with them more. So how to sort of keep these going.
Okay, I think that'd be a good idea. And we can try and sort of push it a little, even nudge it a little bit at the lecture next week as well. We'll make sure we do that.
Exactly. I love
May I share an idea? I thought about Global Studio as simple words. Maybe it's by its simplicity, it could give a simple logo by, if I made it like symbols here down in frame 3 down, global studio, capital word, capital alphabets, and studio under global by simple simple alphabets, and the alphabet O of global, it's an art of the earth, and I think it may be a little bit expressing the idea of global studio by having the earth, and maybe we could transform the word global studio into green to share the idea of being green and being green and sustainable. And I think I don't know, but I see the logos with alphabet and simple ideas of alphabet. I think it's a widespread, and it could spread faster than other logos of symbols. I don't know, but it's in my mind. It's a thing in my mind. And I don't know what's your opinion about something like that.
I think it's an interesting point. We've with the social enterprise that I'm part of, we play around with our logo regularly as a group of artists. And one of the things that we've come to realize is the value in having, maybe we can have it, a version of it that is more complex and has imagery as well. But to be able to, as you're talking about with the actual title of Global Studio, have that be extractable in a more simple way that's still recognizable as part of that, bigger logo, but to simplify, to have a sort of simplified version to be able to use on documents and so on, so that it becomes more flexible that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Word marks or text-based logos are very efficient for just everyday practical use, but they take a lot longer to form that mnemonic and emotional hook. So if you combine the two of them, right, like pick out a specific typeface that really works well for what we're trying to say, and find a way to take your icon or your symbol and work that into the word mark. Like you were saying, now you have two different forms, and that can become a very strong communicator.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think.
And maybe even borrow. I'm just thinking as Meral, as you're talking about how we could also borrow other very recognizable symbology, and for example, like how the rainbow has become very recognizable as a recognizably identifiable as a justice in LGBTQ, and so that I was in a bias training recently, and they talked about how important it is to have, in that sense, they were talking about, putting your preferred pronouns next to your name as a faculty member. For me to do that, it's a signal to people who are from a more precarious group, vulnerable group, that it's a safe space. So, like, for example, if the letters of studio were the rainbow colors, then, that just becomes sort of a signal to people that it's a safe space for different groups. I mean, I can tell you a little bit. This one that I'm working on was playing around with over here, which is the one with some of the ideas that I was thinking about as I was playing with this is, you know, like to have this very, she looks like probably from a Central American indigenous culture. Begins from, I included her as a way to speak to knowledge, you know, the levels of knowledge systems and how, you know, we tend to prioritize Western Eurocentric knowledge systems, and you know, the playing around with the differences in scale by making the insect so big, integrating the hands into not just you know, a symbology, but actually moving these lines so that they connected to the arm drawings, so that it actually begins to be that those hands are involved in all of these different things. The inclusion of a different planet to make, you know, to make it a sense of always thinking bigger. You know, it's actually not just the Earth that we need to talk about when we talk about sustainability, because we're now talking about going to other moons and planets. And I find it fascinating that the language that's already being used is going to colonize Mars. So with, you know, even with all of the discussion of decolonizing and how much damage that's done, we turn right around and say, okay, we're going to colonize Mars now, you know, without actually any knowledge of what's already living there. So once again, we're treating it like it's an empty planet, just like we do with the fact that when we came to Turtle Island, we assumed we treated it like an empty landscape, and we occupied it. And, you know, we're doing exactly the same thing again. So just to make, you know, sort of make myself and others think about these different ideas. So that's kind of and the birds just seem playful. So that's why I added the birds. So that's kind of what I was thinking with this one.
Kristen raises a very interesting point that's worth considering. Even the way we represent the globe is, of course, there's no reason why North America should be up and Australia down, or the way we represent the globe also reveals our biases towards the world in general.
Absolutely.
And that's something to think about as well as we design a logo. How do we represent the globe in a different way?
I can tell you, Douglas, when I did the website for the International Student Festival, which, you know, the precursor to our current global studio, the amount of time I spent for the globe image in that to find one that didn't put North America at the or Europe at the center of the globe. And it took me ages to find a globe image that you know, that reflected that.
Do we have a website for the global studio yet?
It's in the works. In fact, Douglas and I are meeting with somebody on Friday and then so hopefully it will be up and running, and certainly we have you know, we'd love any sort of input. I put a call out for anybody who was interested to join us and in creating it in, you know, sort of this kind of a forum, and I just got no response. So
I'm sorry I missed that.
Well, we'd love to have you join us if you you know, if you'd like to do that. It just, at this point, it needs to get up and running. So yeah, we had to just simplify it and get it up and going.
But we will engage everyone as the design develops, so everybody has an opportunity to contribute. We just want to check out some of the ideas with a web designer we've worked with in the past to see what could work. And based on today's discussion too, I think we're going to change it a little bit more. so that we can get something that really is both a repository of information, things that we can all share together, but also as a way of moving forward and doing exactly the what we're doing here. How can we interact together online, even though we're separated by thousands of kilometers?
Exactly. And Ray, I think in your introduction, I think you mentioned you do some web development.
Yeah.
You know, and are there ways that websites are becoming more interactive? Because, you know, I mean, the reality is the traditional websites, they have limited interactive features, but they're not really largely interactive. And I don't, you know, is there, I mean, I've done a bit of web design, but I would never dream to call myself any kind of an expert in it. And in fact, I don't know if you have.
Short answer, yes. Short answer, yes. Long answer, it can be a bit complicated depending on what you kind of interactions you want to foster and the means by which it's going to be interacted with, right? Because unfortunately, any online interaction is moderated by a device, right? So that's a phone, a watch, desktop, laptop. So that interaction point where the people are touching base with your information, that's what needs to have the consideration, right? Do you want this to be an AR experience where they can just take their phone and then start experiencing your information through an augmented reality program? Is it going to be video based? Is it an auditory based? Are there choices for those? And then how do you communicate that? And that's all notwithstanding the actual nuts and bolts of the technology stack that you're going to use to deploy that. I mean, the first question I always ask any client is, who's going to be responsible for the site once it's built?
Yeah.
Because then we start looking at CMS, right? What content management system do you want to deploy? If it's going to be a team of faculty who don't have the technical know-how to, you know, update a code base for an augmented reality app, then that's probably not the route to go.
Well, and also one of the things that I'm always keeping in mind is, because this is a global studio and we want people to be from all over to be able to interact with it, is that we don't sort of assume our level of access and bandwidth and data. And, you know, like some of the people I work with in Africa, they have to buy their data to do anything online. So so, you know, if you start designing things so that the only way you can interact with them is with a really high graphic load or video load or whatever, you're excluding a lot of people just by doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember buying data packs when I was there. It was just that was absurd.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, that's the only way they have to do that. And it's, you know, it's crazily unaffordable.
But the leveraging of telecommunications tools, right? Like being able to do all your banking by SMS, right? Like all of that. I was just amazed at how throughout the continent of Africa, that technological leapfrogging.
We're so far behind here. It's just ridiculous. I mean, like but my friends and I can like send money and stuff back and forth to each other by our phone. And, you know, and it's instantly there.
Yeah, there's so much that we have to learn.
Another thing that I just, by playing around with this, to go back to this drawing that I'm working on, is to think about like the points of intersection. Like we were talking about, I was saying earlier, I think one of the things the Global Studio is becoming so interesting is because it's becoming an intersection of practice and academia. And so, you know, like what do these intersections mean? you know, like in this drawing, for example, is, you know, how can you begin to articulate those intersections? Because I do think the intersections of, the idea of intersection is very important, both intersections of disciplines, intersections of, you know, community, because that's something, you know, I think, and the group that Joy's involved in AEDE from University of Calgary, they're going to be doing some workshops with us on community participation and community design. And that's something that I do a lot of. And so I'd really like this to become, you know, for that to become another intersection. So the Global Studio is actually becomes an intersection of not just academia and practice, but also community, you know, so where it becomes an intersection of community, academia, and practice, so that those knowledges begin to, not only do they start to lose hierarchy, but they also begin to infiltrate each other and because, you know, there's huge power in that, but the reality in practices, it rarely happens. And I think that that is one of the, you know, the characteristics that the Harvard GSD did a really interesting panel discussion on regenerative design about a month or two ago. And that was one of the things that was in one of the case studies that was brought forward was, you know, when you actually start engaging those in the community in a meaningful way. One of the examples was that the design firm was able to get rid of the legal aspect of the project because they were actually talking with the community. So they were able to just, you know, resolve things that way. And that paid for a huge percentage of the project, just getting rid of the legal fees. So, you know, the practicalities of what some of these intersections mean, I think is really cool to think about.
Was that the talk with Carol Stanford, where she has that section where she talks about paradigms?
Yes.
Yes, I watched the same one.
Yeah, it was excellent. It was
Yeah.
excellent. And I thought that they had an elder from the Lakota Nation, and he had some just things that have just stuck in, mind-blowing things that have just stuck in my head. Yeah.
Yeah, I live in Vancouver, so I really appreciate how having better consultation with the community, especially the First Nations, because it's their land, how that changes the way it changes the parameters of the problem that we're solving, right? And it takes it away from this whole like shareholder return and puts it into something that's far more valuable to everybody.
Yeah.
Are there specific domains of, I don't want to limit it, but are there specific domains that the Global Studio is really trying to influence?
I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, it sort of goes back to, I mean, you know, just based on the fact that we're a educational institution, you know, and maybe I'm misunderstanding what you mean by domains, but I think the domain of education and institutional, and even more specifically institutionalized education, because often it's the institutions who are actually the drivers. So, you know, you want to make changes, but you know, like the levels, just as an example of institutionalized racism, no matter, you know, here we're having all these EDI discussions and meetings and whatever, and yet the fundamental levels of institutionalized racism, are they actually changing? I'm not convinced. So, you know, I think that's, and I think that becomes one of the interesting things of of having, as Doug said, the students being more of an active part of the learning process, that becomes a mechanism to, to begin to push back at that, I think, because it basically, at the end of the day, I'm more and more convinced that everything comes down to power. And, that begins to take a bit of the power away from the institution, actually, when the students are part of the, now, of course, the students are in effect part of that institution by the fact that they're there. But, it does at least begin to kind of deconstruct the traditional ways of institutions, I think.
I would say, Ray, that as well, it's not so much we want to influence certain groups. It's we really, as Kristen said, we want to empower students to make changes. So we don't even want to kind of predict or suggest what those changes are going to be, but rather let it arise from groups like Supernatural and AEDE, the new directions that we really need to think about in architectural education.
So really, the Global Institute is facilitating change.
I would use empowering or enabling change.
Okay. I appreciate the distinction in those terms.
Well, Kristen, I'm going to suggest that I think there's 4 participants left, and 2 of them are you and me.
So, exactly. So we I was going to let it run until 10, which we're effectively there, and suggest the same thing. So once again, just thank you for everyone for participating. And Ray, if you could send me your contact details.
Absolutely. Trying to remember what my Athabasca email is. I almost rarely use it.
And I go through this every once in a while. I want to make sure that we save the chat.
Yes, that would be valuable, but I'm afraid I don't know how to do that either.
Well, as we did earlier, we were trying to learn how to do something with the breakout groups. We Googled it.
Of course.
Do let me know after your conversation with your web developer what CMS you guys intend on using. That'll help me understand what sort of options you have for things like information architecture, what you want to share and how you want to present that, especially across a global audience. CMS will play a big role. Because like you said, you don't want to do massive videos unless they're hosted on YouTube. You want to have really easy to print out information. If somebody only has a text, an old school phone, not a smartphone, but one that can just show text on a screen, you want to make that accessible.
Well, and even watching videos on YouTube, it takes a lot of data if you don't have an internet access.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. And And we will hopefully see some of you on next week at the Grove tour. And I'll see you on Friday, Doug.
Yes. Well, thank you everybody for staying till the end. I appreciate it. And thank you, Kristen, for organizing this session. So I look forward to, well, I know I'm going to interact with just about everybody on this call. So I'll look forward to doing that in the days and weeks to come.
Likewise. Pleasure to get to meet you, Kristen, and Doug. Love your insights as always.
Okay.
And nice to meet you too, Anissa.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.